Hello, welcome to my channel.
The billionaire invited his wife to his engagement party to humiliate and divorce her. But she arrived with a radiant smile, stood on stage, and announced she was pregnant with twins. Then, right there, she handed him the divorce papers, ended the party with pride, and walked away, leaving him humiliated and full of regret. But the story doesn't end there. 10 years later, she invited him somewhere. Why? I won't tell you now, because I don't want to kill the suspense. Hi, my beautiful family, it's your Mr. Peter. Before anything else, let me say this from the depths of my soul. May God wrap every one of you in his mercy. May he protect your health, restore your broken places, and fill your homes with peace, joy, and unshakable love, because that's what I always wish for you, even now while I'm unwell. Yes, family. I'm not strong right now. My body is tired, but my heart, it still burns for you. And though I can't speak to you with my voice today, I'm still here, writing with trembling hands and eyes full of tears, because you deserve nothing less than my very best. My dear brother James is helping me by narrating, but the soul behind this story is still me, your Mr. Peter. But today, I must be honest with you. This channel, our home, is under attack. Competitors have reported my channel. I've received a warning, and it's not just a YouTube strike, it's a strike to my heart, because all I've ever given you is love. Pure, honest, story-driven love. And now, when I need you most, I feel a silence that breaks me more than any illness ever could. So I say this as your brother, your storyteller, your family. Please don't just scroll. Don't just watch a few minutes. Watch the full video, from the very first second to the very last breath of this story. Let YouTube see the power of real love. Let them know this family is alive, like this video. Leave a comment. Flood this place with prayers and hope. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for unity, for love that shows up. Not just when the stories are sweet, but when the storyteller is struggling. You are my strength. You are the reason I fight. And I believe, with all my heart, that love like ours cannot be shaken. So now, let your heart be still. Let your soul lean in. Let Mr. James speak the words. But know every word came from me. Let the story begin. And please, stay with me until the end.
Don't worry, Mother. When I announce my engagement to Serafina Blackwood tomorrow night, that woman will break down and beg me not to leave her. Alok Devine froze outside her husband's study, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach, where twins grew in secret. Jeremy's voice carried through the mahogany door like poison seeping through wood, each word destroying 3 years of what she'd believed was genuine love. She has nothing without me, Jeremy continued, his laugh sharp with cruelty. No money, no connections, no actual talent worth mentioning. Tomorrow night will be perfect. She'll beg publicly, and everyone will finally see what she really is. Vivienne Avant's patrician voice crackled through the speaker, sharp with malicious approval. Brilliant, darling. Serafina Blackwood is perfect. Blue blood, trust fund, the right breeding. Not some nobody architect who thinks she can play in our world. Alok's breath caught. The marble floor beneath her bare feet suddenly felt like quicksand. She was 32 years old, a brilliant architect whose innovative designs had quietly revolutionized sustainable luxury buildings. Yet to her husband's family, she remained nothing more than an inconvenient charity case who'd somehow tricked their golden boy into marriage. The engagement party is all arranged, Jeremy's voice dripped with satisfaction. I told Alok it's a renewal of our vows celebration. She actually believed me. Can you imagine? 3 years of marriage and she still thinks she means something. The betrayal hit like physical pain. Those elegant ivory invitations she'd helped him address just yesterday. the stunning black gown hanging in their closet that she'd chosen specifically for what she'd believed was a celebration of their love, the venue at the Metropolitan Club, her suggestion because she'd thought Jeremy wanted to honor their relationship publicly, all of it orchestrated as her public destruction. When I get up there tomorrow and announce my engagement to Serafina instead, Jeremy continued with sick pleasure, Alok will completely fall apart. It'll be beautiful to watch her beg. These social climbers always show their true desperation when cornered. And if she doesn't break down? Vivienne's voice carried decades of cruel sophistication. Oh, she will, Jeremy laughed. She has nothing. No family money, no real connections, no talent that matters. I've made sure she's completely dependent on me financially and socially. When I pull the rug out, she'll have nowhere to land but on her knees. Aloke retreated silently from the door, each step controlled despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. In the guest bathroom, she gripped the marble sink as Jeremy's words echoed through her mind, like accusations. No actual talent worth mentioning. The irony was staggering. Every innovative design element in the Morrison Tower, Jeremy's pride and joy, had emerged from her architectural genius. The sustainable cooling system that impressed investors, her patented technology, the revolutionary glass integration featured in Architectural Digest, her breakthrough innovation. For 3 years, she'd been the hidden mastermind behind Avance Development's meteoric rise, creating architectural marvels while Jeremy claimed credit and planned her destruction. But that wasn't even the most damaging part of his ignorance. No money of her own. Alok almost laughed despite her devastation. Jeremy had no idea about the Swiss account where she'd been quietly depositing licensing fees from her patented building innovations. Innovations worth over $40 million that corporations worldwide were paying to use. He didn't know about the Divine Corporation's standing offer to make her a full partner, an offer worth $60 million that she'd declined to stay loyal to her marriage. Most importantly, he had no clue about the meticulous records she'd kept of every stolen design, every appropriated innovation, every contract won through her uncredited genius. What had started as professional habit had become, she realized now, the foundation of his complete destruction. Completely dependent on him. The final insult. Jeremy saw her as some desperate social climber who'd gotten lucky, when in reality she was the architectural prodigy who'd elevated his mediocre family business into a powerhouse. She'd turned down offers from the world's most prestigious firms to build something with the man she'd loved. But that love had been one-sided. While she'd been creating their empire, Jeremy had been planning her humiliation. Alok placed both hands on her stomach, feeling the flutter of new life. Twins. His children, though he'd never have the chance to know them now. These babies would never know a father who saw their mother as disposable, who planned to break her spirit for sport. A cold clarity settled over her, sharp and crystalline as winter air. Jeremy thought tomorrow's engagement party would showcase her desperation and his power. He expected tears, pleading, collapse. He was about to discover just how wrong he could be. The woman Jeremy thought he knew, the grateful wife, the dependent social climber, the nobody with no options, was about to vanish forever. In her place would stand Alok Divine, architectural genius and soon-to-be billionaire. A woman who'd built an empire while he'd built only delusions. Jeremy wanted a show tomorrow night. He was going to get one, just not the show he'd planned. Walking to her private office, Alok pulled out her secured laptop and began making calls. By morning, the Divine Corporation would have her acceptance of their partnership offer. Her patents would be transferred to her personal holding company. Her Swiss accounts would be activated for immediate access. Most satisfying of all, every piece of evidence documenting Jeremy's theft of her work would be compiled into an ironclad legal case that would destroy him professionally and financially. Tomorrow night, Jeremy Paul Avance was going to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Never underestimate the woman whose genius built your kingdom, especially when she's the one who holds the keys to tear it down. The twins fluttered again, as if sensing their mother's transformation from victim to victor. Alok smiled, her hand protective over her stomach. "Don't worry, babies," she whispered. "Your father just taught Mommy exactly what kind of man he really is. And now he's going to learn exactly what kind of woman I am." By dawn, 3 years of careful documentation would become Jeremy's legal nightmare. By evening, the architectural world would learn the true genius behind Avance Development's success. And by tomorrow night, Jeremy Paul Avance would understand that some women don't break under pressure. They forge themselves into weapons that cut through lies and destroy the men foolish enough to underestimate them. The game was about to begin, and Alok held all the winning cards. Chapter 2. The plan backfires spectacularly. Crystal chandeliers reflected off champagne flutes, raised in anticipation of blood sport, as Manhattan's elite gathered to witness what they believed would be Alok Devine's public destruction. They had no idea they were actually toasting Jeremy Avant's complete annihilation. The Metropolitan Club's grand ballroom buzzed with predatory excitement. Society vultures perched on vintage chairs, their designer gowns and borrowed diamonds glittering under lights that would soon illuminate the most spectacular reversal of fortune the social elite had ever witnessed. Jeremy stood near the orchestra platform like a conqueror surveying his kingdom, his chest puffed with arrogant confidence. Beside the marble fireplace, Vivienne Avance held court with her coven of bitter socialites, their thin lips curved in anticipation of the entertainment Jeremy had promised them. "She has absolutely no idea what's coming," Serafina Blackwood whispered to her cluster of trust fund friends, her voice carrying just enough to reach several nearby ears. "Poor little thing probably thinks this is some romantic gesture." Scattered laughter rippled through the group, cruel and sharp as broken glass. They'd all come to see the nobody architect grovel, to watch Jeremy put the social climber back in her place with surgical precision. If only they knew the show they were about to get. Alok moved through the ballroom like liquid grace incarnate, her emerald silk gown flowing around her like water made from precious stones. She'd chosen the color deliberately. Emeralds for new beginnings, for the rebirth that would begin tonight. Her dark skin glowed against the rich fabric, and her hair was swept into an elegant updo that showcased the diamond necklace Jeremy had given her for their first anniversary, back when his gifts had been expressions of love instead of chains of ownership. Tonight she wore his diamonds like armor. Every conversation paused as she passed, every eye tracked her movement with the focused attention of predators watching wounded prey. But what they saw as vulnerability was actually something far more dangerous. The calm before a hurricane that would level everything in its path. "Darling, you look absolutely radiant," cooed Margot Whitfield, wife of a pharmaceutical fortune and one of Vivienne's closest allies. "So excited for Jeremy's big announcement tonight." "Thank you, Margot," Aloki replied with a serene smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm quite looking forward to it myself. I think everyone will be very surprised." Something in her tone made Margot's predatory smile falter slightly, but before she could analyze the warning, Alok had already glided away toward the next cluster of social executioners. Jeremy caught her eye across the room and nodded toward the platform, his expression radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Show time." His confidence was so complete, so absolutely certain of victory, that Alok almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The orchestra quieted on cue as Jeremy strode to the microphone with the commanding presence that had first caught Alok's attention in graduate school. He was undeniably handsome, tall, broad-shouldered, with classical features that belonged on Renaissance sculptures. It was that face, that charm, that natural authority that had made her believe she'd found her equal. How wrong she'd been. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jeremy's voice rang out with practiced authority, echoing off the club's vaulted ceilings. "Thank you for joining me tonight for what I promise will be an absolutely unforgettable celebration." A ripple of anticipatory tension moved through the crowd like electricity. Aloki positioned herself in clear view of everyone, her posture regal as a queen at her own coronation. Not a single person in that room suspected they were about to witness the complete inversion of power between predator and prey. 3 years ago, Jeremy continued, his eyes finding Alok's with what the crowd interpreted as tenderness, but she recognized as calculated cruelty. "I made choices that seemed right at the time. Tonight I'm here to correct those mistakes and embrace the future I truly deserve." Vivienne practically vibrated with malicious anticipation. Serafina stood straighter, preparing for her moment of triumph. The assembled vultures leaned forward collectively, their social radar pinging with the promise of spectacular destruction. "Therefore," Jeremy announced with theatrical flourish, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom, "I am thrilled to introduce you to my fiancée, the woman who will truly be worthy of the Avant's name, Miss Serafina Blackwood." The gasps were immediate and sharp, cutting through the air like blade strikes. Serafina glided forward in her ice-blue gown, her perfect blonde head held high as she joined Jeremy on the platform. Her smile was victorious, triumphant, the expression of someone who just won the greatest prize. The crowd's eyes darted frantically between the happy couple and Alok, waiting for the collapse, the tears, the desperate pleading that would provide their evening's blood sport. This was the moment they'd all come for. The spectacular breakdown of a woman who'd dared to reach above her station. Jeremy paused dramatically, his gaze locked on Aloke with predatory satisfaction that made her skin crawl. This was his moment of ultimate victory, when the woman who'd dared to think herself worthy of his name would crumble publicly and beg for another chance, like the desperate social climber he'd always believed her to be. But Aloke didn't crumble. She didn't gasp or stumble or reach for a chair to steady herself. She didn't show even a flicker of the devastation they'd all expected. Instead, something magnificent happened. Her spine straightened like a blade being drawn from its sheath. Her chin lifted with the natural bearing of someone born to command. And when she smiled, truly, radiantly, devastatingly smiled, the entire ballroom felt the shift in power, like a seismic event that rearranged the very foundation of reality. Aloke began walking forward through the stunned crowd, her emerald gown flowing behind her like liquid victory. Every step was measured, graceful, deadly. The vultures who'd come to feast on her destruction suddenly looked uncertain, their predatory instincts confused by prey that had somehow transformed into an apex predator. Jeremy's smug expression began to falter as Alok approached the platform with the confident stride of someone who owned not just the room, but everyone in it. This wasn't in the script. She was supposed to break down, collapse, beg, not approach like a conquering goddess ready to claim her throne. Without invitation or permission, Alok stepped onto the platform and moved to Jeremy's side. The action was so smooth, so naturally commanding, that he automatically stepped back, confusion beginning to cloud his features. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that the audience held its collective breath. She held out her hand for the microphone, and in his bewilderment, Jeremy gave it to her without thinking. The moment the device touched her fingers, everyone in the room understood that the evening had just taken a turn no one had anticipated. "Well," Aloke said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom like silk wrapped around steel. "What absolutely perfect timing, Jeremy." The crowd was motionless, suspended between anticipation and growing dread. Serafina's perfect composure began to crack around the edges like expensive porcelain under pressure. Vivienne's predatory smile wavered as something cold and terrible began to dawn in her calculating mind. "Jeremy, darling," Aloke continued, her tone warm with an affection that somehow felt more dangerous than any display of anger could have been. "I have an announcement of my own, something I've been waiting for, just the right moment to share with everyone." Jeremy's confident facade cracked like expensive porcelain as the full implications crashed over him. Pregnant, twins, his children. The children he was publicly abandoning for another woman in front of Manhattan's most powerful people. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't how any of this was supposed to unfold. Where were the tears? Where was the desperate begging? Where was the broken woman he'd expected to destroy for his mother's entertainment? Alok turned to face the crowd, the microphone steady in her manicured hand, her smile radiant as sunshine and twice as devastating to everything it touched. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice growing stronger and more commanding with each word, "I'm absolutely delighted to inform you that I'm pregnant with twins. Jeremy's twins." The silence that followed was so complete, it seemed to suck the air from the room. Jeremy's mouth fell open in horror as the full implications crashed over him like a tsunami. Pregnant. Twins. His children. The children he was abandoning publicly, in front of Manhattan's most influential people, for another woman. But Alok wasn't finished. She was just getting started. "And since my dear husband has made his choice so beautifully, so publicly," she continued, her voice growing stronger and more devastating with each syllable, "I'll make mine the same way. Jeremy, I want a divorce. Tonight. Immediately." The crowd began to murmur, but Alok held up her free hand with such natural authority that silence fell instantly. "And darling," her smile turned absolutely, lethally beautiful, "you just gave me legal grounds for abandonment of a pregnant spouse in front of 200 witnesses. I'm taking everything." Jeremy looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his confident facade crumbling as the magnitude of his miscalculation began to sink in. This wasn't the grateful little wife he'd planned to humiliate. This was something else entirely, something he'd apparently never seen coming. "You see," Alok continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom with the clarity of a bell-tolling judgment, "while Jeremy's been busy planning this charming little performance, I've been busy documenting 3 years of systematic intellectual property theft." The murmurs grew louder, but still she commanded absolute attention. "Every design credited to Avant's development that actually came from my mind. Every patent filed under his name for innovations I created. Every contract won through architectural genius that emerged from my sleepless nights while I worked in shadows, building his empire while he planned my destruction." Jeremy's face had progressed from pale to gray to something approaching green. Serafina looked like she wanted to disappear through the marble floor. Vivienne's expression had shifted from anticipation to dawning horror as she began to understand the true scope of what was happening. The Morrison Tower that graced the cover of Architectural Digest? My design, my innovation, my sleepless nights turned into Jeremy's magazine feature. The sustainable cooling system that convinced the Henderson Group to invest $50 million. My patent, filed independently 6 months before Jeremy ever saw the blueprints. The revolutionary glass integration that won the Sterling Prize. My breakthrough, developed in secret while Jeremy networked at country clubs. Alok's voice never wavered, never lost its warmth, even as she systematically destroyed the man who'd tried to destroy her in front of the very audience he'd assembled to witness her humiliation. "So, Jeremy," she concluded, pulling off her wedding ring with theatrical slowness and placing it on the microphone stand like an offering to the gods of justice. Congratulations on your engagement to Serafina. I hope you'll both be very happy together." She paused, her smile turning so devastatingly beautiful that several people in the audience actually gasped. "You're going to need each other because after my lawyers finish presenting my evidence of intellectual property theft, a felony, by the way, you're going to have absolutely nothing else." She turned to face Jeremy directly, and for a moment that felt suspended in Amber, he saw something in her eyes that made his blood turn to ice water. Not anger, not hurt, not the devastation he'd planned to create. Complete, utter, victorious clarity. "Did you really think," she asked softly, the microphone catching every word and carrying them to the farthest corners of the ballroom, "that I would spend 3 years married to you without protecting myself? Did you honestly believe I was just some grateful little charity case who never saw this coming?" Jeremy tried to speak, but no words came. His empire, everything he'd been so proud of, everything that had made him feel superior to the wife he'd dismissed as worthless, was crumbling around him like sand castles at high tide. "You called me a social climber," Alok continued, her voice growing stronger. "But darling, I was never climbing toward your world. I was building my own, and you were too arrogant to notice that you were standing on my foundation." She stepped down from the platform and began walking toward the exit, every head in the ballroom turning to follow her progress like sunflowers tracking the sun. She moved like a queen leaving her coronation, radiating power and dignity that made everyone else in the room feel suddenly, inexplicably diminished. At the ballroom doors, she paused and looked back one final time. Jeremy stood frozen on the platform next to Serafina, both of them looking like actors who'd forgotten their lines in a play that had suddenly changed from comedy to Greek tragedy. "Oh, and Jeremy," Alok called out, her voice carrying easily across the silent room. "Don't worry about the twins. They'll be much better off without a father who thinks destroying their mother is entertainment." Her final smile was radiant as a sunrise and twice as devastating to everything it illuminated. "Consider yourself officially uninvited from their lives." And with that, Alok Devine walked out of the Metropolitan Club ballroom, leaving behind 3 years of marriage, a room full of stunned socialites, and one man who just learned the catastrophic difference between breaking someone and revealing their true strength. Behind her, the silence stretched for several heartbeats before exploding into the most vicious, delighted gossip Manhattan society had witnessed in decades. But Aloke didn't hear any of it. She was already 3 steps ahead, moving toward a future where she would never again be underestimated by anyone. The war Jeremy had started was over before he'd realized it had begun, and he had lost everything. Chapter 3. The Legal Victory. Blood dripped steadily from Alok's fingertips onto the pristine white hospital sheets, each crimson drop a testament to how far Vivienne Avance was willing to go to destroy the woman who'd humiliated her son. 6 weeks had passed since the Metropolitan Club disaster, and the emergency room at Mount Sinai had become a battlefield where Aloke Devine fought for her twins' lives while simultaneously waging legal war against the family that had tried to break her. "Mrs. Avance," Dr. Rashida Patel's voice carried the weight of exhaustion as she reviewed the latest test results. "Your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and the stress is affecting the babies. You need complete bed rest, which means no more depositions, no more legal meetings, and absolutely no contact with anyone from your husband's family." Aloke shifted carefully against her hospital pillows, her dark eyes blazing with determination despite her physical weakness. At 6 months pregnant, her body was betraying her at the worst possible moment, but her mind remained sharp as surgical steel. "Doctor." "Patel, you don't understand," Alok said, wincing as another contraction rippled through her abdomen. "They're trying to destroy 3 years of documented evidence. If I'm not there to defend my work, if you're not here to carry these babies to term, there won't be anyone to defend," the doctor interrupted firmly. Mrs. Avance, you've been hospitalized 3 times in 6 weeks. Your body is shutting down from stress. On the bedside table, Alok's phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and architectural firms worldwide. News of the Metropolitan Club revelation had spread through professional circles like wildfire, and everyone wanted a piece of the story. The brilliant architect whose stolen innovations had built a real estate empire, now fighting to reclaim her life while carrying the children of the man who tried to destroy her. Margaret Chen is handling the depositions, Alok murmured, though her hand instinctively moved to protect her swollen belly as another wave of pain struck. But Jeremy's legal team is claiming the pregnancy announcement was fabricated for dramatic effect. They're saying I'm using the babies as leverage. Dr. Patel's expression hardened. The ultrasound images I provided to your attorney are very real, as are the medical records showing you've been pregnant since before that engagement party fiasco. The irony was bitter as medicine. Jeremy had spent weeks claiming Alok had fabricated her pregnancy for sympathy, right up until the moment her lawyer had produced medical records proving she'd been carrying twins when he'd publicly humiliated her. Now his legal strategy had shifted to claiming she'd hidden the pregnancy deliberately to trap him. As if Jeremy Paul Avance had ever been worth trapping. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and Margaret Chen entered with the careful steps of someone bearing either very good or very bad news. The impeccably dressed attorney had become Alok's lifeline over the past month, translating 3 years of meticulous documentation into legal weapons that were systematically destroying the Avance family's attempts at damage control. "How are you feeling?" Margaret asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. "Like I'm fighting a war on 3 fronts," Alok replied honestly. "My body, Jeremy's lawyers, and Vivienne's media campaign to paint me as a gold-digging opportunist." Margaret's smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. "Well, I have news that should help with at least one of those battles. Jeremy's legal team just requested another settlement conference." "Another one?" Alok struggled to sit up straighter, ignoring the protests from her exhausted body. "What's their offer this time? 15 million and supervised visitation rights." Margaret's tone suggested exactly what she thought of that proposal. "They're still operating under the delusion that you need Jeremy's money to survive." Alok's laugh was weak but genuinely amused. 15 million. The licensing fees from my sustainable cooling patent alone generate more than that annually. "Which is exactly what I told them," Margaret confirmed, pulling a thick folder from her briefcase. "Along with documentation proving your intellectual property is worth approximately $200 million in current market value, with projected earnings of $60 million per year." The folder landed on Alok's hospital bed with a satisfying thump, containing 3 years of evidence that would have made a criminal prosecutor weep with joy. Every design sketch, every patent application, every email trail proving that Alok Devine's genius had built the Avance empire while Jeremy took credit and planned her destruction. The Morrison Tower alone is generating $12 million annually in licensing fees to international firms copying your innovative designs, Margaret continued. Your glass integration system is being used in 43 buildings worldwide. The sustainable cooling technology has been adopted by 6 major architectural firms. "And Jeremy knew none of this?" Dr. Patel asked, fascination creeping into her professional demeanor. "Jeremy thought his wife was a talented decorator who occasionally helped with projects," Margaret replied with barely concealed disdain. "He had no idea she was the architectural genius behind his company's meteoric rise. While he was networking at country clubs, she was revolutionizing sustainable building design." Alok closed her eyes, remembering the countless nights she'd spent perfecting innovations that Jeremy would present as his own work. The thrill of creation, the satisfaction of solving impossible engineering problems, the joy of building something beautiful and functional. All of it overshadowed by the man who'd seen her contributions as a convenient resource to be exploited. "There's more," Margaret said, and something in her tone made Alok's eyes snap open. "Jeremy's business is collapsing without your innovations." The Henderson Group canceled their $50 million contract when they discovered Jeremy couldn't explain the technical specifications of the cooling system. 3 other major deals have fallen through because Jeremy can't reproduce the engineering brilliance that won him those contracts. "Good," Alok said without a trace of sympathy. "Let him try to build an empire with actual talent instead of stolen innovations." "Meanwhile," Margaret continued with obvious satisfaction, "Serafina Blackwood has mysteriously become unavailable for wedding planning. Apparently, a bankrupt fiancé with no prospects doesn't meet her standards for acceptable husbands." The news should have felt like victory, but Alok was too tired and too focused on the lives growing inside her to feel much satisfaction. Jeremy's personal disasters were just karmic background noise compared to the real work of building her future. "What about Vivian's media campaign?" Alok asked, referring to her soon-to-be former mother-in-law's increasingly desperate attempts to control the narrative. Margaret's expression darkened. "She's been telling anyone who'll listen that you seduced Jeremy for his money, hid your pregnancy to trap him, and fabricated evidence of intellectual property theft for sympathy. Unfortunately for her, the architectural community knows your work. 3 major firms have already issued public statements supporting your claims." "Foster and Associates released a statement yesterday," Margaret continued, consulting her notes. "They confirmed that you've been consulting on their sustainable building projects for 2 years, independent of any connection to Avant's development. The Divine Corporation issued a press release detailing their standing partnership offer worth $60 million. "They made it public?" Alok asked, surprised. "They wanted to counteract Vivienne's claims that you're financially dependent on Jeremy. When the business world learns you turned down $60 million to stay loyal to your marriage, it somewhat undermines the gold digger narrative." Dr. Patel shook her head in amazement. "You turned down $60 million. "I was in love," Alok said simply. "I thought we were building something together. I didn't realize I was just providing free labor for my own eventual humiliation." Another contraction gripped her, stronger this time, and both women leaned forward in concern. Alok breathed through it, her hands protective over her belly. "The twins are fighting to stay," she murmured once the pain passed. "They're going to be warriors, just like their mother." "Speaking of which," Margaret said carefully, "Jeremy has requested a meeting. He wants to discuss custody arrangements." Alok's expression went arctic. "Custody? He publicly abandoned pregnant me for another woman. He told 300 people that these babies were mistakes he wanted to correct." "That's exactly what I told his lawyer," Margaret confirmed. "I also mentioned that family court judges tend to take a dim view of fathers who humiliate pregnant wives at public events." "What did he say?" Margaret's smile was predatory. He hung up. Another knock interrupted them, and a nurse entered with flowers, the 5th arrangement to arrive that day. The card read, "From your admirers at Chen and Associates Architecture. Your genius deserves recognition." "The entire industry is watching," Margaret observed as the nurse arranged the flowers with the others filling Alok's room. "This case has become bigger than your marriage. You've become a symbol for every woman whose work has been appropriated by powerful men." Alok studied the flowers, thinking about the weight of symbolhood when all she wanted was to protect her babies and rebuild her life. But perhaps being a symbol had its advantages. Perhaps Jeremy's attempt to destroy her had actually revealed the strength she'd never known she possessed. "Margaret," she said finally, "I want to make Jeremy an offer." "Alok, not a settlement offer. A lesson." Alok's voice grew stronger, clearer. I want him to understand exactly what he lost, exactly what he threw away, exactly what he never deserved. Margaret leaned forward, recognizing the tone of someone who'd moved from defense to offense. I'm going to build the most successful architectural firm in the world, Aloke continued. I'm going to win every major award, secure every prestigious contract, and make more money than the Avance family ever dreamed of possessing. And I'm going to do it all while raising his children to understand that real strength comes from creation, not destruction. And Jeremy? Alok's smile was serene as sunrise and twice as beautiful. Jeremy will get to watch from the sidelines as I become everything he prevented me from being while we were married. He'll see our children grow up proud of their mother's achievements and ashamed of their father's failures. She looked at Margaret with eyes that blazed with new purpose. How's that for a settlement offer? Margaret's answering smile was sharp enough to cut through 3 years of stolen credit and public humiliation. I think Jeremy Avance is about to learn that some women don't just survive their destroyers. They surpass them so completely that the destruction becomes irrelevant. As if summoned by their conversation, Alok's phone rang with a call from Jeremy's lawyer. Margaret answered with professional courtesy that somehow felt more devastating than any threat. Morrison, Sterling, and Associates, Margaret Chen speaking. Oh, Mr. Walsh, how nice to hear from you again. Another settlement offer. I'm afraid Mrs. Avance isn't interested in settling anymore. She's decided to take everything instead. The conversation that followed was brief and brutal. By the time Margaret hung up, Jeremy's legal team understood they were no longer negotiating with a desperate wife seeking fair treatment. They were facing a brilliant woman who'd been underestimated once and would never allow it to happen again. The war was entering its final phase, and Alok Divine held every weapon that mattered: truth, evidence, talent, and the absolute certainty that she deserved better than anything Jeremy Avance had ever given her. Victory was no longer a hope. It was an inevitability. Chapter 4. Birth and Empire Building. 2 tiny fists emerged into the world at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, followed by the most beautiful sound Alok Divine had ever heard: the strong, angry cries of her firstborn son declaring his arrival. Kai, she whispered through tears of exhaustion and joy as Dr. Patel placed the squirming, perfect baby on her chest. 4 minutes later, his brother made his entrance with equal drama. And Zaire, Kai and Zaire Divine. Not Avance. Never Avance. These children would carry their mother's name and inherit her strength. Dr. Patel finished her examinations. Both boys are healthy, strong, and clearly inherited their mother's determination. Kai is 6 pounds, 2 ounces. Zaire is 5 pounds, 15 ounces. Margaret Chen appeared in the doorway with tears streaming down her normally composed face. They're perfect. When the nurse asked for birth certificate information, Alok didn't hesitate. Father's name unknown, last name Divine, Kai Azrael Divine and Zaire Asante Divine. She'd chosen their middle names carefully. Azrael meaning helped by God, Asante meaning thank you. Over the next 3 days, Alok's hospital room became headquarters for launching her new life. Between feeding sessions and diaper changes, she reviewed partnership agreements with Divine Corporation and fielded calls from reporters. By discharge, she had preliminary agreements for 4 major projects worth $50 million. Her first stop after leaving the hospital wasn't the Tribeca penthouse Jeremy had been forced to sign over, but a modest 2-bedroom apartment she'd rented months earlier. The apartment was small but filled with light, the nursery simple but perfect. 2 cribs positioned where morning sunlight would wake her boys gently. "Welcome home," she whispered to Kai and Zaire as she settled them in their cribs for the first time. "This is where we start fresh." That first night alone with her sons was both terrifying and liberating. Every cry, every feeding reinforced that she was solely responsible for these perfect beings who depended completely on her strength and love. But as she sat feeding Zaire at 2 a.m. while Kai slept peacefully, Alok felt more powerful than she ever had during her marriage. This was real strength, not borrowed authority or reflected prestige, but something entirely hers. By the time her sons were 6 months old, Alok had officially joined Divine Corporation as a senior partner and begun preliminary work on what would become her signature project, a 40-story sustainable luxury tower that would redefine environmentally conscious architecture. She worked from home, sketching revolutionary building concepts while her babies napped, developing innovations that would make Jeremy's stolen concepts look primitive. The irony was delicious. Jeremy had tried to steal her genius, but in forcing her independence, he'd actually unleashed capabilities she'd never fully explored. Her home office became a creative laboratory where she pushed the boundaries of sustainable design. Solar integration so sophisticated it could power neighboring buildings. Water reclamation systems that turned luxury towers into environmental assets. Glass technologies that regulated temperature without traditional cooling. Every breakthrough felt like victory over the man who tried to reduce her to nothing. 18 months after the twins' birth, Margaret arrived for their weekly business meeting with news that made Alok laugh out loud for the first time since Jeremy's betrayal. Jeremy filed for complete bankruptcy liquidation yesterday, she announced. Total financial annihilation. The family estate is going to auction next month, including Vivienne's precious jewelry collection. Alok glanced up from her architectural drawings, where Kai and Zaire worked quietly on homework between their bouncy seats. Everything? Every last asset, the penthouse you refused, the Hamptons house, the Colorado property, even the vintage car collection. Apparently, his professional collapse was more devastating than anyone realized. And Jeremy, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, working as a junior architect at a firm that specializes in strip mall designs. The satisfaction was overwhelming. Jeremy, who'd believed himself so superior, had fallen so far that he was now designing the kind of mundane projects she'd been creating revolutionary alternatives to for years. There's more, Margaret continued. Vivienne had a stroke last month. Nothing life-threatening, but she's been moved to a care facility. Apparently, watching her son's complete destruction while her former daughter-in-law rises to international prominence was too much stress. Alok felt a moment of sympathy, but it passed quickly. Vivienne had orchestrated years of cruelty designed to break her spirit. Any word on whether Jeremy's tried to contact the twins? Nothing. His lawyer mentioned potential custody discussions once, but Jeremy never followed through. Alok glanced at her sons, imagining Jeremy trying to handle night feedings and diaper blowouts. The relentless needs of tiny humans who couldn't be impressed by charm or intimidated by authority. He has no idea what he's missing, she said softly. Their loss is entirely his gain, Margaret replied. You're raising them without the toxicity he would have brought to their lives. That evening, as Alok worked on preliminary sketches while her sons played nearby, she realized Jeremy's betrayal had given her the greatest gift possible, complete freedom to become the woman she was meant to be. He'd tried to break her and instead had broken every limitation she'd placed on herself. He'd attempted to steal her genius and instead had forced her to claim it fully. He'd sought to destroy her future and instead had freed her to build an extraordinary life. As Kai babbled happily at his reflection and Zaire discovered his own feet with delighted squeals, Alok smiled at the beautiful irony of her situation. Jeremy Paul Avance had set out to prove she was nothing without him. Instead, he'd proven she was everything despite him. And that was the most perfect revenge of all. Chapter 5. The Rise. 5 years later. Architectural Digest had never featured a woman of color on their cover before Alok Devine, and they'd certainly never had a cover story that included two adorable 5.5-year-olds explaining their mother's revolutionary building designs with startling confidence. "Mommy makes buildings that breathe," Kai announced to the photographer, his dark eyes sparkling with intelligence. "She showed me how the glass moves air around so people don't need air conditioners." "And the water goes in circles forever," Zaire added enthusiastically, gesturing toward the scale model of their mother's latest masterpiece, a 50-story tower in Singapore that would be completely energy neutral. "Boys," Alok laughed from across the conference room of Divine Corporation's Manhattan headquarters, "let the photographer work." 5 years had transformed Alok from a woman hiding her genius behind her husband's name into one of the most respected architects in sustainable design. Divine Corporation had grown from a startup partnership into a mid-sized firm with offices on 3 continents. Her innovations in sustainable building had become industry standard among environmentally conscious developers. "Mrs. Divine," called Rachel Morrison, the magazine's senior editor, "we'd love to get some shots of you with the Singapore project renderings." Aloke moved to the display wall where holographic projections showed her latest creation. "The building is essentially a vertical ecosystem. Traditional architecture imposes on the environment. My designs participate in it." "Mommy, can we show them the fish?" Kai asked, tugging on her dress. "Fish?" Rachel looked intrigued. Alok smiled, activating another display. "The building includes aquaponics systems that process gray water while providing fresh fish and vegetables for residents. Completely closed-loop sustainability." "How does it feel?" asked James Chen from International Architecture Today, "to know that your innovations are being implemented in over 200 buildings worldwide?" "Satisfying," Aloka replied honestly. "But what feels better is knowing that my sons are growing up in a world where environmental responsibility and luxury aren't mutually exclusive concepts." She glanced at Kai and Zaire, who discovered the scale model and were conducting what appeared to be a serious discussion about load-bearing structures. At 5.5 years old, they showed a remarkably advanced understanding of sustainable building concepts for their age. "Mrs. Devine," called Sandra Williams from Forbes, "our research indicates that Divine Corporation is now valued at over $800 million, making you the most successful woman in sustainable architecture. How do you respond to those who claim your success stems from divorce publicity rather than genuine innovation?" The question hung in the air like a poorly designed building, structurally unsound and destined to collapse under scrutiny. Alok's smile was serene as sunshine and twice as devastating to anyone foolish enough to underestimate her. "I'd respond by pointing out that my innovations have been independently verified by engineering firms worldwide. My buildings have won 17 international awards, and my sustainable technologies are being studied by environmental scientists on 4 continents," she said, with the calm authority of someone who'd never needed to defend her genius to anyone who mattered. "Furthermore," she continued, "anyone suggesting my success is due to publicity rather than talent is welcome to examine the 300 patents I hold independently, or the $60 million in annual licensing fees my innovations generate." "Any word from your ex-husband about your success?" asked one particularly bold reporter. Kai looked up from his architectural exploration. "Who's asking about the sperm donor?" The room erupted in laughter, but Alok maintained her composure even as pride bloomed in her chest. Her sons had long ago learned to refer to Jeremy clinically, acknowledging his biological contribution while emphasizing his complete irrelevance to their actual lives. "My sons have never needed their biological father," Alok said simply. "They've seen that real strength comes from creation, not destruction." That's the only lesson about their origins they need. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if your marriage had worked out differently? Sandra pressed. Aloke glanced around the conference room, her conference room in the company she'd built, surrounded by evidence of innovations that were changing the world, and then looked at her sons, who were now collaborating on what appeared to be an impromptu redesign of the Singapore Tower's lobby. No, she said with absolute certainty. Some people are meant to lift others up. Some people are meant to tear others down. I'm grateful I discovered which category my ex-husband belonged to before I wasted any more time trying to build something beautiful with someone who only knew how to destroy. Besides, she added with a smile that could have powered the Singapore Tower for a week, why would I wonder about a limitation when I'm living unlimited? Margaret Chen, who'd been quietly observing from the back of the room, caught Alok's eye and nodded toward her watch. The interview was running over, and Aloke had a video call with clients in Tokyo in 20 minutes. Last question, Rachel announced, sensing the session was ending. Mrs. Devine, called out a young reporter from Architectural Weekly, what would you say to young women who feel their talents aren't being recognized or valued? Alok looked directly into the camera, knowing her answer would be quoted in articles worldwide. I'd say that your genius doesn't need anyone else's permission to exist. Document your work, protect your innovations, and never let anyone convince you that supporting their dreams means abandoning your own. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd learned these lessons through fire and emerged stronger than steel. And remember, she added, glancing at her sons with unconditional love, sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is reveal their true character early, before you've invested too much in the wrong person. As the media crew began packing their equipment, Kai and Zaire approached their mother with the focused intensity of children who'd been remarkably patient but were now ready for promised rewards. Mommy, you said we could get ice cream if we were good during the boring talking, Zaire reminded her with the kind of logic that brooked no argument. You were perfect, Aloke confirmed, gathering them close for hugs that felt like victory celebrations. Chocolate or vanilla? Both, they declared in unison, triggering another round of laughter from the lingering reporters. As the room cleared and Margaret began organizing the remaining business of the day, Aloke stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, looking out over Manhattan with her sons pressed against the glass beside her. 5 years ago, she'd been a woman whose genius was stolen, whose love was betrayed, whose future had seemed uncertain. Today, she was the woman reshaping global architecture while raising 2 remarkable children who understood that strength came from creation, not destruction. Somewhere in Queens, Jeremy Paul Avance was probably designing another strip mall, wondering how his life had collapsed so completely, while his ex-wife's had soared beyond anything he'd ever imagined possible. The thought should have felt like revenge, but it didn't. It felt like justice, the kind of inevitable outcome that occurred when people finally got exactly what they deserved. Jeremy had chosen destruction. Alok had chosen creation. The results spoke for themselves. Mommy, Kai said thoughtfully, pressing his small hand against the window. When I grow up, I want to build things that help people too. Me too, Zaire agreed, but I want to build them in space. Alok smiled, wrapping her arms around her sons as Manhattan spread out below them like a promise of unlimited possibilities. You can build anything you want, she told them with the certainty of someone who'd learned that the only real limitations were the ones you accepted. Even buildings that fly, Kai asked with 5-year-old seriousness. Especially buildings that fly, Aloke confirmed, kissing the top of his head as the afternoon sun painted their reflections gold against the window. After all, she'd once been told she could never build anything that mattered. And look how beautifully that prediction had aged. Chapter 6. New Love Enters, 8 years later. Music floated across the candlelit ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum as Manhattan's elite gathered for the annual Children's Hospital benefit, unaware they were about to witness Alok Devine discover that some kinds of magic were worth believing in again. 8 years had passed since Jeremy's betrayal, 8 years during which Alok had built an empire, raised extraordinary sons who were now 8 3/4 years old, and convinced herself that romantic love was a luxury she neither needed nor wanted. Tonight, that certainty was about to be thoroughly, beautifully shattered. Dr. Kingsley, the children's cardiac wing couldn't exist without your foundation's support, Aloke was saying to the tall, distinguished surgeon across from her, completely unaware that her carefully constructed walls were about to crumble at first sight. When Dr. Dante Kingsley turned to face her fully, Alok experienced something she'd forgotten was possible. The electric shock of genuine connection with someone who might actually be worthy of the risk. He possessed the kind of beauty that suggested character had shaped his features as much as genetics. Dark skin that seemed to absorb and reflect the ballroom's golden light, intelligent eyes that held warmth without weakness, and a smile that managed to convey confidence without arrogance, a combination Jeremy had never achieved despite years of practice. "Mrs. Devine," he said, extending his hand with the careful precision of someone accustomed to handling delicate things. "Your reputation precedes you, though I have to admit I expected someone much more intimidating." His voice carried just a hint of humor, as if he understood that powerful women were often described in terms designed to diminish rather than celebrate their strength. "Dr. Kingsley," she replied, noting how perfectly their hands fit together, and immediately trying to ignore the significance of that observation. "I could say the same about you. Your work in pediatric cardiology is legendary, but nobody mentioned you were charming." "Careful, Mrs. Devine. Compliments like that could go to a man's head." Something about his easy confidence intrigued her. This wasn't the desperate charm of someone trying to impress her wealth or status. This was the natural magnetism of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "Mommy?" 8-year-old Kai appeared at her elbow with the timing that suggested children possessed supernatural abilities to interrupt interesting adult conversations. "Zaire wants to know if we can see the dinosaur bones after the boring dinner part." "Kai Devine," she said with gentle reproach. "This is Dr. Kingsley. We use our manners when meeting new people." Kai studied Dante with the serious evaluation of a child who'd grown up as his mother's protector, assessing whether this strange man might pose a threat to their perfect family dynamic. "Are you a real doctor or a pretend doctor like the ones on TV?" Kai asked with 8-year-old directness. Dante crouched down to Kai's eye level, a gesture that immediately earned Aloke's attention. In her experience, men who bothered to treat children as equals usually possessed character worth respecting. "I'm a real doctor," Dante confirmed seriously. "I help fix children's hearts when they're not working properly." "Like surgery?" Kai's eyes widened with fascination. "Exactly like surgery. Very complicated surgery that requires years of study and practice." "Cool." Kai turned to his mother with obvious approval. "Mom, this one's better than the last boring doctor guy you talked to." Alok felt heat rise in her cheeks as Dante's eyebrows raised with amusement. "Kai, why don't you go find your brother and tell him we'll visit the dinosaurs after dinner?" As Kai scampered away, Dante straightened with a smile that suggested he'd found the entire interaction charming rather than awkward. "Last boring doctor guy?" he asked with mock concern. "Dr. Richardson from the hospital board," Alok explained. Kai wasn't impressed by his 15-minute lecture about his yacht collection. Ah, the yacht lecture, a classic mistake when trying to impress 8-year-olds. Something about his easy humor made Alok smile in a way she hadn't in years. Not the polite professional smile she'd perfected for business events, but something genuine and unguarded. "Dr. Kingsley." "Dante, please." And may I call you Alok? Mrs. Devine feels unnecessarily formal for someone whose son has already given me his approval. You think you have Kai's approval? He called me better than the last guy. In 8-year-old terms, that's practically a ringing endorsement. Before Aloke could respond, Zaire appeared with the kind of perfect timing that suggested her sons had been coordinating their interruptions. "Mom, are you going to marry the doctor?" he asked with the devastating directness that made dinner party conversations impossibly complicated. "Zaire Divine," Alok gasped, mortification flooding through her as Dante's laugh rang out across the ballroom. "That's quite a question, young man," Dante said, crouching down to Zaire's level with the same respectful attention he'd shown Kai. "But I think I should at least ask your mother to dance before we start planning weddings." "Do you know how to dance?" Zaire asked skeptically. "Because Mom is really good and she says most men dance like robots having seizures." "Zaire." But Aloke was fighting laughter despite her embarrassment. "I've been known to move around a dance floor without causing injuries," Dante assured Zaire solemnly. "Though I can't promise I'm as good as your mother." "You should try," Zaire decided with 8-year-old authority. "Mom never dances with anyone because she says they're all boring or trying to impress her money instead of her." Dante's eyes found Aloke's over Zaire's head, and something in his expression made her breath catch. He wasn't looking at her like she was a conquest or a business opportunity. He was looking at her like she was a woman worth knowing, worth pursuing, worth the effort of real courtship. "Well then," he said, rising and extending his hand toward Alok with old-fashioned gallantry, "perhaps you'd allow me the honor of proving I'm neither boring nor interested in impressing anyone but you." The orchestra was playing something soft and romantic, couples swaying across the marble floor under chandeliers that cast everything in golden light. Aloka hesitated, aware that accepting would signal something. To him, to her sons, to herself. "Go on, Mom," Kai encouraged from somewhere behind her. "He seems nice, and he's definitely better looking than the yacht guy." "Kai." But she was laughing now, the careful control she maintained at these events dissolving under her son's enthusiastic matchmaking and Dante's patient, hopeful expression. "One dance," she conceded, placing her hand in his. The moment they stepped onto the dance floor, Alok understood why she'd been avoiding this kind of connection for 8 years. Dante moved with the confident grace of someone who'd learned to dance properly, not just shuffle around looking uncomfortable. His hand settled at her waist with perfect pressure, confident without being presumptuous, leading without being controlling. "Your sons are remarkable," he said as they found their rhythm together. "They're also completely lacking in filter," Alok replied, hyper-aware of how perfectly they fit together, how natural this felt despite being the first time she'd danced with anyone since Jeremy. "I like that about them. Too many children their age have learned to say what adults want to hear instead of what they actually think. You spend a lot of time with children." Occupational hazard of pediatric surgery. "I've learned that kids are usually the most honest people in any room." Something about his easy affection for children made Aloke's carefully maintained skepticism begin to crack. Men who genuinely enjoyed her son's company were rarer than architectural innovations and infinitely more valuable. "What made you choose pediatric cardiology?" she asked, genuinely curious about this man who seemed too good to be real. "I wanted to fix the things that matter most," he said simply. "A child's heart is the center of everything, their future, their family's hope, their potential to change the world. When you can repair that, you're not just performing surgery, you're restoring possibilities." The sincerity in his voice made Alok's chest tighten, with an emotion she'd forgotten she was capable of feeling. Here was a man who spoke about his work the way she spoke about hers, not as a career, but as a calling to create something meaningful. "That's beautiful," she said softly. Not as beautiful as buildings that heal the environment while sheltering the people inside them, he replied. I've studied your work, Alok. What you're doing isn't just architecture, it's environmental medicine on a global scale. The fact that he understood her vision, that he saw beyond the prestige and profit to the deeper purpose, sent warmth flooding through her in ways that had nothing to do with the ballroom's chandeliers. You've studied my work. Anyone interested in healing systems should understand your innovations. The way you've integrated sustainable technology with luxury design is revolutionizing how we think about human habitation. They danced in comfortable silence for several moments, each lost in the surprising pleasure of finding someone who understood their passion for healing the world in different but complementary ways. Dr. Kingsley, Dante, Aloke corrected herself. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why aren't you married? The question escaped before she could censor it, and she immediately felt heat flood her cheeks. I'm sorry, that was honest, he finished with a smile. I appreciate honesty. The truth is, I've been waiting for someone worth the complication. Complication? Love, he said simply. Real love is always complicated. It requires vulnerability, compromise, the willingness to build something together instead of just coexisting. I've met plenty of women who wanted the status of dating a successful surgeon, but very few who were interested in the actual person. His words resonated with painful accuracy. How many men had pursued her as a trophy? The brilliant architect, the successful businesswoman, the wealthy divorcee, without any interest in who she actually was beneath the accomplishments. And you think I might be different? She asked carefully. I think, he said, spinning her gently under his arm before pulling her close again, that a woman who raises sons like yours, who builds healing into her architecture, who faces the world with that kind of strength and grace, might be worth whatever complications arise. Before Aloke could respond, the song ended and her sons appeared beside them with the timing of children who'd been watching from the sidelines. So, Kai asked expectantly, are you going to ask Mom on a real date, or do we need to give you her phone number? Kai divine, we do not, Alok began. Actually, Dante interrupted with a smile that made her forget whatever reproach she'd been planning. I was hoping your mother might allow me to take all three of you to dinner, if that would be acceptable to everyone involved. All three of us, Zaire looked skeptical. Adults usually want kids to disappear when they're trying to impress someone. Your mother and I just spent 10 minutes talking about fixing hearts and healing buildings, Dante replied seriously. Anyone who creates that kind of beauty in the world probably raised sons worth getting to know. Kai and Zaire exchanged glances that suggested they were conducting some kind of telepathic conference, then turned back to Dante with identical expressions of approval. We accept your dinner invitation, Kai announced formally. But Mom gets to pick the restaurant because she has better taste than most people. And if you're boring or mean to her, we know martial arts, Zaire added with 8-year-old menace. Zaire, Aloke gasped, but Dante was laughing with genuine delight. Understood and agreed to, he said, offering Zaire a solemn handshake. No boring conversation, no meanness, and I'll defer to your mother's superior restaurant taste. As they walked back toward their table, Alok felt something she hadn't experienced since before Jeremy's betrayal. Hope. Not the careful optimism she applied to business ventures or architectural projects, but the dangerous, beautiful hope that came with meeting someone who might actually be worth the risk of believing in love again. Next Saturday? Dante asked as they reached her table. Next Saturday, she confirmed, then surprised herself by adding, and Dante, thank you for understanding that my sons and I are a package deal. Alok, he said with a smile that made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the room. I wouldn't want it any other way. As he walked away, Kai tugged on her evening gown with obvious satisfaction. "Mom, I think we found you a good one." "Yeah," Zaire agreed, sliding into his chair beside her. "He's way better than the sperm donor." For the first time in 8 years, Alok found herself agreeing that maybe, just maybe, there were some risks worth taking after all. Chapter 7. The New Family, 10 years later. 10 and 3/4-year-old hands trembled slightly as Kai Devine carefully positioned the velvet ring box on the coffee table, while across the room his brother Zaire practiced his speech for the third time that evening. "Are you sure we're doing this right?" Kai whispered, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood this moment would change everything. "What if Mom says no?" "She won't say no," Zaire replied, with the confidence of a child who'd spent 2 years watching his mother fall in love with the best man they'd ever known. "Look how happy she is with Dante, and he's been more of a dad to us than the sperm donor ever was." 2 years had passed since that first dinner date had blossomed into something beautiful and permanent. 2 years of Dante showing up for school plays and soccer games, helping with homework and bedtime stories, treating Kai and Zaire not as obstacles to overcome, but as treasures to be protected and guided. 2 years of watching their mother transform from a woman who'd built walls around her heart into someone who laughed freely, loved openly, and had found partnership instead of just companionship. Tonight, everything would become official. "He's here," Kai announced, peering through the blinds of their Upper East Side apartment. A warm, loving home that bore no resemblance to the cold marble perfection Alok had once shared with Jeremy. This space was filled with family photos, children's artwork, medical journals mixed with architectural drawings, and the comfortable chaos of a life built on love rather than status. Dante Kingsley entered with the quiet confidence that had made him one of the most respected pediatric surgeons in the country. But tonight his usual composure was tinged with nervous excitement. In his hands he carried a bouquet of white roses, Alok's favorites, and in his pocket a ring he'd spent months designing to capture the strength and beauty of the woman who'd taught him that love was worth any risk. "Gentlemen," he said formally, setting the flowers on the counter and turning to face the boys with the seriousness this moment deserved. "Are you ready?" "We've been ready for months," Zaire replied, producing a small wrapped package. "This is for you. From both of us." Dante accepted the gift with curiosity, carefully unwrapping what appeared to be a handmade photo album. The first page contained a picture from that first dinner 2 years ago, all four of them laughing over dessert at a small Italian restaurant, where Dante had won the boys over completely by letting them order whatever they wanted and listening seriously to their opinions about everything from dinosaurs to space travel. Subsequent pages chronicled their journey from tentative new family to inseparable unit. Dante teaching Kai to throw a football. Zaire falling asleep against Dante's shoulder during a movie night. Family vacation photos from their trip to the Smithsonian, where Dante had patiently answered 4 hours of questions about how everything worked. The final page contained a letter written in careful 10-year-old handwriting. "Dear Dante, you probably think you're asking Mom to marry you tonight, but really you're asking all three of us to be a family forever. We want you to know that we already consider you our real dad. You chose us when you didn't have to, and you love us the way fathers are supposed to love their children. The sperm donor never wanted us, never even tried to know us. But you do. You show up for school plays and soccer games, help with homework without complaining, and make Mom laugh in ways we never saw before you came into our lives. We love you and we want you to officially be our dad. Love, Kai and Zaire. P.S. We helped pick out Mom's ring because we know exactly what she likes. We also know she's going to say yes because she tells her friends you're the best man she's ever known." Dante had to clear his throat several times before he could speak, touched beyond words by these remarkable children who'd opened their hearts to him with the same generosity their mother had eventually shown. "Boys," he said finally, "I want you to know that marrying your mother isn't just about the two of us. I'm asking to become your father in every way that matters. Would you, would you be okay with that?" "Are you kidding?" Kai grinned. "We've been waiting for you to make it official forever." "Plus," Zaire added pragmatically, "we already call you Dad when Mom's not listening. It'll be nice not to have to whisper." The sound of Alok's key in the door sent all three of them into position. Dante straightened his tie, the boys flanked him on either side, and the ring box sat ready on the coffee table like a small velvet promise of forever. "I'm home," Aloke called out, her voice carrying the contentment of someone who'd built a life filled with exactly the right people. "Something smells amazing. Are you three cooking without supervision again?" "We're in the living room, Mom," Kai called back, barely able to contain his excitement. Alok appeared in the doorway, still elegant in her business attire but softened by the smile that automatically appeared whenever she saw her three favorite men together. At 42, she was more beautiful than she'd been at 30, her success and happiness having added a radiance that no amount of makeup could replicate. "What's all this?" she asked, noticing the flowers, the formal arrangement, and the barely suppressed excitement radiating from her sons. "Mom," Zaire began, following the script they'd rehearsed, "we need to ask you something important." "All three of us," Kai added, reaching for Dante's hand in a gesture of solidarity. Dante stepped forward, his usual composure giving way to the vulnerability that came with risking everything on love. "Alok, 2 years ago, your sons invited me to dinner because they thought you needed someone who wouldn't bore you or try to impress your money instead of your heart." "They were right," she said softly, her eyes beginning to shine with unshed tears as she understood what was happening. "They've taught me that real family isn't about biology or obligation," Dante continued, pulling the ring box from his pocket and dropping to one knee as Kai and Zaire flanked him like an honor guard. "It's about choosing each other every day, about building something beautiful together, about loving someone enough to become the best version of yourself." "Dante," Aloke whispered, her hands flying to her mouth as tears began to fall. "Alok divine," he said, opening the box to reveal a ring that perfectly captured her essence. Strong, beautiful, unique, and designed to last forever. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that some men know the difference between a woman worth having and a prize worth winning? And will you let Dante adopt us?" Kai added earnestly, "because we want him to be our real dad officially." "We already love him like he's our real dad," Zaire confirmed. "We just want the paperwork to match our hearts." Aloka looked down at these three extraordinary males who'd transformed her life in ways she'd never imagined possible. Dante, who'd courted not just her but her sons, who'd understood from the beginning that loving her meant embracing the entire package. Kai and Zaire, who'd somehow known exactly what kind of man their mother deserved long before she'd been brave enough to believe it herself. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes to all of it. Yes to marrying you. Yes to the adoption. Yes to being a family in every way that matters." The ring slid onto her finger with the kind of perfect fit that suggested some things were simply meant to be. As Dante rose to kiss her, Kai and Zaire threw themselves into the embrace, creating a family huddle that felt like the most natural thing in the world. "We have one more surprise," Kai announced when they finally broke apart. "We already started the adoption paperwork," Zaire explained proudly. "Our lawyer friend Margaret helped us, and she says we can change our names to Kingsley if we want." "And we do want to," Kai confirmed. "Kai Kingsley sounds way better than Kai Divine, and definitely better than having the sperm donor's name." Alok looked at Dante with amazement. "You started adoption proceedings?" "I wanted to be prepared," he admitted. I've known for months that I wanted to ask you to marry me, but I also knew that meant asking to become their father officially. They deserve a dad who's legally committed to protecting and providing for them, not just someone who loves them. Plus, Zaire added with 10-year-old practicality, this way, if anything happens to Mom, we get to stay with Dad instead of being sent to foster care or something horrible. The thoughtfulness, the planning, the way Dante had considered every aspect of what marriage would mean for all of them, overwhelmed Aloke with gratitude for this man who'd somehow known exactly how to love her family. There's something else, Dante said, producing another small box. Kai, Zaire, I know your mother is getting the engagement ring, but I wanted you both to have something too. The boys opened identical boxes to find matching watches engraved with Kingsley family forever and the date. These are like promise rings, Dante explained seriously. My promise that I'll always be your dad, that I'll always choose you, that you'll always have someone in your corner no matter what. Kai and Zaire examined their watches with the reverence due to family heirlooms, understanding instinctively that they were receiving more than jewelry. They were getting the security of belonging to someone who wanted them. When's the wedding? Zaire asked practically. And can we help plan it? Kai added, because we have opinions about cake flavors. 6 months, Alok decided, looking at Dante for confirmation. Enough time to plan something beautiful, but not so long that we have to wait forever to make it official. And yes, you can absolutely help plan it, Dante confirmed. It's going to be our wedding, all 4 of us. Every decision should include your input. As they settled onto the couch together, a real family unit planning their official beginning, Aloke marveled at how completely her life had been transformed. 10 years ago, she'd been a woman whose husband had publicly humiliated her while she carried his children. Tonight, she was surrounded by a man who'd fallen in love with all of her, including the complications that came with being a successful single mother. I love you, she whispered to Dante as the boys debated wedding cake flavors with the seriousness of professional food critics. I love all of you, he replied, encompassing the entire family with his gaze, more than I ever thought possible. Somewhere across town, Jeremy Paul Avance was probably spending another evening alone in his modest apartment, wondering how his life had become so small while his ex-wife's had become so magnificently large. But Alok didn't spare a thought for the man who'd lost everything because he'd never understood what truly mattered. She was too busy planning a future with people who'd chosen to love her exactly as she was. Successful, complicated, fierce, and worth every effort required to win her heart. The Kingsley family was about to become official, and it was going to be everything Jeremy had never been capable of providing. Real, lasting, and built on the kind of love that chose commitment over convenience. Some fairy tales began with "Once upon a time." The best ones began with "Will you marry us?" Chapter 8. The Ultimate Success. $500 million looked different than Aloka had imagined, displayed not as cash or gold, but as a Forbes magazine cover featuring her serene smile beneath the headline, Architecture's Most Influential Woman, How Alok Kingsley Built an Empire That Heals the World. The magazine lay open on the conference table of the Kingsley Foundation's Manhattan headquarters, where Aloki and Dante were reviewing plans for their latest project, a network of sustainable hospitals in underserved communities. Mrs. Kingsley, said Dr. Sarah Martinez, their foundation's medical director, the Guatemala facility is already showing remarkable results. The solar grid you designed is providing power to the entire village, and the water reclamation system is supporting agriculture for a 5-mile radius. 12-year-old Kai looked up from his homework, spread across another section of the enormous conference table. Mom, explain again how buildings can help grow food. The hospital processes all its gray water through a biological filtration system, Alok explained patiently. The clean water that comes out is perfect for irrigation, so the community can grow crops year-round instead of depending on unreliable rainfall. That's so cool, Zaire added, not looking up from the 3D modeling software he was exploring on his tablet. It's like the building is alive and helping everything around it get better. Dante smiled at his sons, officially his sons now, thanks to adoption papers that had made their family legally permanent 6 months ago. Your mother doesn't just design buildings, she designs solutions. The pride in his voice made Alok's heart flutter the same way it had when they'd first danced at the Met, Benefit 4 years ago. Marriage to Dante had proven that real partnership was possible when both people chose to elevate each other rather than compete. Speaking of solutions, Margaret Chen announced as she entered with her usual efficiency, the Environmental Architecture Council wants to present you with their Lifetime Achievement Award at 44. They're calling you the most influential architect of the century. The century just started, Alok protested, though she couldn't help smiling. Exactly their point, Margaret replied. Your sustainable innovations are being used in over 2,000 buildings worldwide. The licensing fees alone generate 68 million annually. Plus the foundation work, Dante added. The Kingsley Medical Foundation has built 37 sustainable hospitals and provides free cardiac surgery for children worldwide. Alok studied the reports, marveling at what they'd built together. Her architectural genius, combined with Dante's medical expertise, had created something neither could have achieved alone. Mom, Kai said thoughtfully, remember when you used to hide your work so the sperm donor could take credit? Kai Kingsley, we don't talk about, Aloke began automatically. I know, he interrupted with 12-year-old exasperation. But I was just thinking how stupid he was. If he'd been nice to you, he could have been part of all this cool stuff instead of living in that tiny apartment and designing strip malls. The observation was startlingly mature for a 12-year-old, but Kai and Zaire had grown up watching their mother build an empire while their father supported rather than sabotaged her dreams. Your biological father made choices, Dante said carefully, but those choices freed your mother to become who she was always meant to be. And they freed us to have a real dad instead of someone who didn't want us, Zaire added matter-of-factly. So really, his stupid choices worked out perfectly for everyone. Margaret laughed. Your sons have excellent perspective on family dynamics. They've had good teachers, Alok replied, squeezing Dante's hand under the table. Mrs. Kingsley, called Rebecca Torres, the Foundation's communications director, as she entered with a tablet displaying news feeds. There's been a development in the Jeremy Avance situation. The room went quiet. Despite his complete irrelevance to their lives, Jeremy's continued existence occasionally intersected with their story. Avance Development filed for final bankruptcy liquidation this morning, Rebecca continued. All assets are being sold to pay creditors. There's also news that Jeremy was arrested last week for professional misconduct on a municipal building project in Newark. Alok felt something that wasn't quite sympathy, but wasn't satisfaction either. Jeremy's complete professional destruction had been inevitable, but hearing about his arrest still felt surreal. What kind of charges? Margaret asked. Professional fraud and endangering public safety. He falsified engineering credentials and signed off on structural plans for a municipal building that failed inspection. The building had to be evacuated and demolished at taxpayer expense. So he's definitely going to prison, Kai asked. Likely 2 to 3 years in federal prison, plus permanent loss of his professional license and substantial financial penalties, Rebecca confirmed. The prosecutor is treating it as a serious case of professional fraud that endangered public safety. Aloke closed her eyes, thinking about the man she'd once loved, who'd somehow fallen so far that he was now facing criminal charges for the same kind of intellectual theft he'd practiced during their marriage. Are you okay? Dante asked quietly, always attuned to her emotional state. I'm sad for him, she said honestly. Not because I still care about him romantically, but because he had every opportunity to build something legitimate and chose to keep lying instead. Some people learn from their mistakes, Margaret observed. Others just make bigger mistakes until they can't escape the consequences. Can we visit him in prison? Zaire asked with innocent concern. I mean, he's technically still our biological father, right? The question highlighted the complex reality of their family situation. Jeremy had never been a father to the boys in any meaningful sense, but his genetic contribution couldn't be completely erased. That's a decision you can make when you're older, Aloke said carefully. Right now, your father is sitting right here, and he's the person who's earned the right to that title. Dante's hand squeezed hers gratefully. Besides, Kai added pragmatically, we're too busy helping Mom and Dad build hospitals to visit people who make bad choices. As the conversation shifted back to their foundation work, Alok marveled at how completely her life had been transformed. 12 years ago, she'd been a woman whose genius was stolen, whose love was betrayed. Today, she was the most successful architect of her generation, married to a man who'd helped her multiply her impact rather than diminish it, raising sons who understood that real strength came from lifting others up. Her phone buzzed with a text from their wedding planner. Final head count for the anniversary party. 400 guests confirmed, including representatives from 23 countries whose hospitals use the Kingsley design. Their 5th wedding anniversary celebration had evolved into an international gathering of people whose lives had been touched by their foundation's work. "What are you smiling about?" Dante asked, noticing her expression. "Just thinking about how many people will be at our anniversary party, because you married someone whose buildings heal the world instead of just impressing rich people." "I married someone whose buildings reflect her character," he corrected. "The healing was already in your heart. The architecture just made it visible." Kai made gagging sounds at their romantic exchange, but Zaire looked thoughtful. "Dad, do you think the sperm donor knows how famous Mom is now?" Dante considered the question seriously. "I think your biological father is probably very aware of what he lost, but that's his burden to carry, not ours to worry about." "Good," Zaire decided, "because we have important work to do." As the meeting continued, Alok reflected on the beautiful irony of her situation. Jeremy had tried to destroy her to prove she was nothing without him. Instead, he'd freed her to become everything despite him. The revenge she'd once planned had become irrelevant compared to the success she'd built with people who actually deserved her. Jeremy's punishment wasn't her anger. It was simply having to live with the knowledge of what he'd thrown away while watching her flourish beyond anything he'd ever imagined possible. Sometimes the best revenge was just living beautifully with people who knew your worth. And sometimes justice looked exactly like a Forbes cover, declaring you the most successful architect in the world, while your husband and sons planned to help you heal it. Chapter 9. Perfect Revenge Planning. Wedding invitation designs scattered across the kitchen island like fallen snow, each one more elegant than the last, while 14 and 3/4-year-old twins debated the merits of revenge versus grace, with the philosophical sophistication of teenagers who'd inherited their mother's strategic mind. "I still think we should invite him," Kai insisted, examining a sample invitation printed on cream cardstock with gold foil lettering that cost more per piece than Jeremy probably spent on food each week. "Not because we want him there, but because witnessing real love might actually educate him about what he threw away." Or, Zaire countered, organizing rejected designs with the methodical precision he'd inherited from his mother, "it might just torture him to watch Mom marry someone who actually deserves her while he sits in federal prison wearing shackles." Alok looked up from her laptop where she'd been reviewing final details for what the media had dubbed The wedding of the century, her marriage to Dante in 6 weeks at the Metropolitan Museum, the same venue where they'd first met 7 years ago when the twins were 8 years old. "Boys," she said with gentle reproach, "we're not planning this wedding to torture anyone. We're celebrating the beginning of our official family." "But Mom," Kai persisted with 14-year-old logic, "wouldn't it be the perfect ending to the story? Him seeing how wrong he was about everything?" The suggestion wasn't entirely without merit. Jeremy Paul Avance, currently serving a 3-year federal sentence for professional fraud and endangering public safety, had spent the past 2 years watching from behind bars as his ex-wife became the most celebrated architect in the world while building a foundation that was literally healing the planet. "What do you think, Dad?" Zaire asked, turning to Dante, who was reviewing seating charts with the concentrated attention of someone planning a surgical procedure. Dante looked up from his work, considering the question with the careful thought he applied to everything involving his family. "I think," he said slowly, "that your mother is the only person qualified to decide who deserves to witness her happiness." "Which is exactly why I married you," Alok said, reaching across the counter to squeeze his hand. "You understand that this is my choice to make." Margaret Chen's voice carried from the living room where she was coordinating with wedding planners via conference call. "The guest list is at 420, including heads of state from 6 countries, the entire board of the World Health Organization, and roughly half the international architecture community." "Or," called Rebecca Torres from her position near the windows where she was managing media requests, "we might need to limit +1s because People, Vogue, and Architectural Digest are all sending coverage teams." The attention was both overwhelming and gratifying. What had begun as a simple ceremony to celebrate their love had evolved into an international event, partly because of Alok's fame, but mostly because their foundation work had touched so many lives worldwide. "Mrs. Kingsley," Rebecca continued, consulting her ever-present tablet, "I've had 3 more interview requests about Jeremy's situation. The producers want your reaction to his imprisonment and whether you've achieved the revenge you sought." "Tell them I'm too busy building hospitals to think about revenge," Alok replied without looking up from the invitation samples. "Some stories aren't about punishment, they're about growth." "That's boring," Kai complained. "Where's the drama? Where's the satisfaction of proving you were right and he was wrong?" "The satisfaction," Dante said with the wisdom of someone who'd learned to love a woman stronger than any revenge, "is in the life your mother built despite him, not because of him." Zaire studied the wedding invitations with renewed interest. But what if inviting him isn't about revenge? What if it's about showing him what he lost so he can finally understand why his choices were wrong? The suggestion carried weight that surprised Aloke. Her sons had grown into remarkable young men with complex understanding of justice, forgiveness, and the difference between punishment and education. Plus, Kai added, warming to the theme, everyone would see that Mom doesn't need to hide from the past because she's built something so much better in the present. Plus, Zaire added pragmatically, we have the perfect way to make sure he knows what he lost. Margaret found out that federal prisoners can watch approved media coverage in the common room. If we make sure the wedding gets enough press coverage, he'll see everything from his prison TV. Kai finished with growing excitement. Every news report, every magazine spread, every interview about Mom's perfect wedding to someone who actually deserves her. The suggestion was both more realistic and more devastating than forcing prison attendance. Jeremy would watch from behind bars as every major media outlet covered his ex-wife's fairy tale wedding to a celebrated surgeon, surrounded by world leaders celebrating her success. Alok set down her laptop and really looked at her sons, these extraordinary teenagers who'd somehow inherited not just her intelligence but her sense of strategic thinking. They weren't suggesting cruelty or vindictiveness. They were proposing something far more sophisticated, demonstration of growth. that would make revenge unnecessary. "What would we put on his invitation?" she asked, surprising herself by entertaining the idea. "The truth," Zaire said immediately. "Something like, 'You taught me what love isn't. Dante taught me what love is. Come see the difference.'" The elegant brutality of the suggestion made Margaret pause her phone conversation, and Dante look up from his seating charts with something approaching admiration. "That's—" Alok began, then stopped, considering the implications. "That's actually perfect." "Really?" Kai's eyes lit up with excitement. "You'll do it?" "I'm thinking about it," she admitted. "Not to hurt him, but to close the circle completely, to show that his worst intentions produced my best life." Rebecca approached with the careful steps of someone about to suggest something potentially controversial. "If you're seriously considering this, there's something you should know. I've been monitoring news about Jeremy's situation." "What kind of news?" Dante asked, immediately protective. "He's been giving interviews from prison," Rebecca replied, consulting her notes. "Mostly to smaller publications, but the message is consistent. He claims he's learned from his mistakes, that he realizes now what he lost, that he hopes you've found happiness." "Sounds like someone angling for sympathy," Margaret observed with professional skepticism. "Maybe," Rebecca agreed, "but there's more. He's been writing letters. Not to you directly," she added quickly, seeing Alok's expression, "but to other inmates, to prison counselors, to anyone who'll listen. All saying the same thing, that he destroyed the most valuable thing in his life because he was too arrogant to recognize its worth." The revelation hung in the air like incense, carrying weight that none of them had expected. Jeremy Paul Avance, the man who'd tried to publicly humiliate his pregnant wife, was apparently spending his prison sentence documenting his own failures. "Has he asked to contact us?" Dante asked carefully. "No," Rebecca confirmed. "His lawyer reached out once, 2 years ago, asking if you'd be open to a letter of apology. Margaret shut that down immediately." "Good," Alok said firmly. "I don't need his apologies, but—" "But," Kai prompted. "But maybe I do need him to see what real love looks like," she continued thoughtfully. "Not for his benefit, but for the completion of my own story." Dante reached for her hand across the counter. "Are you sure? This means risking that he'll disrupt our perfect day through media attention." "He can't disrupt anything," Aloka replied with the confidence of someone who'd learned her own worth through fire. "He has no power over our happiness anymore. He's just a man who made terrible choices while I made beautiful ones." Alok stood up from the counter and walked to the windows overlooking Central Park, where spring was transforming the landscape with new growth. 14 years had passed since Jeremy's betrayal had forced her to discover her own strength. 14 years of building an empire, raising extraordinary sons, and learning that real love existed when you found the right person. "I want to do it," she decided, turning back to her family. "I want Jeremy to see what he lost, not to hurt him, but to complete the story." "You're sure?" Dante asked, rising to stand beside her with the protective instinct that had made him the perfect father to her children. "I'm sure," she confirmed, "but not because I want revenge, because I want closure. I want him to understand that his worst behavior led directly to my best life." "What should the invitation say?" Zaire asked, already reaching for a pen. Alok considered for a moment, then smiled with the serene confidence of someone who'd transformed pain into power. "Keep it simple," she said. "Just the basic wedding information, and then, 'Thank you for showing me what I didn't want so I could recognize what I did. Aloke.'" The boys exchanged glances of pure admiration for their mother's elegant approach to closure. "That's perfect," Kai declared. "It's not mean, but it's definitely clear." "It's classy revenge," Zaire agreed. "The best kind." As Margaret began making calls to arrange the media coverage, and Rebecca started managing the press implications of essentially inviting a federal prisoner to watch society's wedding of the year, Alok felt something she hadn't experienced since the night of Jeremy's betrayal. Complete peace about their shared history. She'd spent 14 years building something extraordinary despite his attempts to destroy her. Now she would let him witness the fruits of that construction through every news report, every magazine cover, every interview about the love she'd found with someone who actually deserved her. Jeremy Paul Avance would sit in that prison common room, watching his ex-wife marry a man who'd spent 7 years proving that real love lifted people up rather than tearing them down. He would see their sons, healthy, brilliant, confident young men who called Dante Dad and referred to Jeremy as the sperm donor without malice, simply as acknowledgement of his irrelevance to their lives. He would witness the celebration of love built on partnership, respect, and shared purpose to heal the world, and when it was over, he would return to his cell with the knowledge that his biggest mistake had freed her to become everything he'd never been capable of supporting. That wasn't revenge. That was justice in its most beautiful form. Chapter 10. Divine Justice Served. Crystal chandeliers cast diamonds of light across the Metropolitan Museum's Great Hall as Manhattan's elite gathered to witness what the New York Times had called the triumph of love over destruction, while 40 miles away in federal prison, Jeremy Paul Avance sat in the common room watching recorded coverage of his ex-wife's wedding on the evening news. The contrast was devastating. 300 guests celebrating love in the museum's grand space, while the man who'd tried to destroy it watched from a concrete cell, surrounded by inmates who'd begun calling him the architect who lost everything. Among the wedding guests filling the Great Hall were heads of state, Nobel laureates, architectural visionaries, and medical pioneers whose lives had been transformed by the Kingsley Foundation's work. The media coverage would be featured across major outlets worldwide, including the evening news broadcasts that reached the Federal Correctional Facility, where Jeremy would spend the next 2 years contemplating his choices. Alok Divine Kingsley stood in the museum's preparation room, radiant in a custom Vera Wang gown that somehow managed to be both timelessly elegant and powerfully modern. At 46, she possessed a beauty that transcended physical features, the luminous confidence of someone who'd transformed suffering into strength, failure into triumph, abandonment into abundance. "You look like a queen," whispered 14 3/4-year-old Kai, adjusting his bow tie with serious concentration. "She looks like someone who won," added Zaire, straightening his formal wear with equal solemnity. "Someone who took the worst thing that ever happened to her and turned it into the best life anyone could imagine." Through the preparation room's windows, they could see guests taking their seats, world leaders who'd traveled specifically to celebrate the woman whose architectural innovations were literally healing the planet, while her medical foundation revolutionized healthcare in underserved communities. "Are you nervous?" asked Margaret Chen, making final adjustments to Alok's train. "Not nervous," Alok replied, checking her reflection one final time. "Grateful for all of it, even the parts that hurt, because they led me here." Dante appeared in the doorway like something from a fairy tale, devastatingly handsome in his custom tuxedo, radiating the quiet confidence of a man who'd spent 7 years proving himself worthy of extraordinary love. "The officiant is ready," he announced, then paused to simply stare at his bride with unconcealed wonder. "My God, Aloke, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "Save some romance for the vows, Dad," Kai advised with teenage practicality, though his smile suggested complete approval of his parents' obvious devotion. "Speaking of vows," Dante said, producing a small velvet box containing matching platinum pins shaped like the Kingsley Foundation logo. a stylized heart surrounded by healing hands. I wanted you to wear these today as a reminder that what we're celebrating isn't just our marriage, but the family we've built and the healing we've brought to the world. As Alok pinned the symbol to her gown and the boys attached theirs to their lapels, she felt the weight of everything this moment represented. 14 years ago, Jeremy had tried to break her in this very building, expecting her to collapse and beg for another chance. Today, she was marrying a man who'd spent 7 years elevating her rather than diminishing her, surrounded by evidence that real love multiplied strength rather than dividing it. The walk to the temple of Dendur felt like a pilgrimage through her own transformation, past the Egyptian artifacts that had witnessed human triumph and tragedy for millennia, toward the ancient temple where she would officially unite with the family that had chosen her as completely as she'd chosen them. Together, the Kingsley family walked into the great hall as the crowd rose in respectful admiration for the woman who'd transformed architectural design, revolutionized medical philanthropy, and demonstrated that some stories end with triumph rather than tragedy. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of love and symbolism. Judge Amanda Richardson, a longtime friend and respected federal judge, officiated with words that honored both their individual achievements and their shared commitment to healing the world. Love, Dr. Richardson announced to the assembled guests, is not about finding someone to complete you, but about finding someone who inspires you to complete yourself. Alok and Dante exemplify this truth, two whole people who've chosen to build something beautiful together. When it came time for vows, Dante spoke first, his voice carrying clearly through the ancient temple. Alok, 7 years ago you taught me that real love isn't about rescuing someone or being rescued. It's about choosing each other every day, about building something together that's stronger than what either person could create alone. You've shown me that the past doesn't define us. Our response to it does, and your response has been magnificent. Alok's own vows were delivered with the confident eloquence that had made her one of the most sought-after speakers in the world. Dante, you taught me that love doesn't require sacrifice of self. It requires celebration of self. You've spent 7 years proving that real partnership elevates both people rather than diminishing either. You've shown me and our sons that strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. That legacy is the greatest gift you could give our family. When Kai and Zaire stepped forward to present the rings, their words carried the weight of children who'd witnessed both the worst and best of human nature. These rings represent promises, Kai announced clearly. Mom and Dad promised to keep choosing each other, and we promised to keep being the best family we can be. And, Zaire added with 14-year-old wisdom that stunned the sophisticated audience, we promise to remember that real family isn't about who created you, but about who chooses to love you completely. As Dr. Richardson pronounced them husband and wife, the celebration that erupted was unlike anything the social elite had ever witnessed. Instead of polite applause, the temple filled with genuine joy from people whose lives had been touched by the couple's work. Meanwhile, in the Federal Correctional Facility's common room, Jeremy watched the evening news coverage of the celebration, surrounded by fellow inmates who'd grown tired of his constant self-pity. The media coverage was extensive, featured segments on major networks and international outlets covering what they called architecture's wedding of the year. Real love, Alok's voice carried through the prison's cheap speakers as she addressed the wedding guests, doesn't ask you to become smaller. It challenges you to become larger. It doesn't steal your dreams. It helps you build them. It doesn't break you down. It lifts you up. Jeremy's hands trembled as he watched his ex-wife deliver what amounted to his obituary disguised as wedding vows. She spoke about partnership built on respect rather than control, about love that celebrated achievement rather than appropriating it. To anyone who's ever been told they're too much, too ambitious, too successful, too independent, she continued, looking directly into the camera as if she knew he was watching. Remember that the right person will celebrate those qualities, not try to diminish them. The final knife twist came disguised as gratitude. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is reveal their true character early, before you've invested too much in the wrong person. As the coverage continued with interviews from world leaders praising the couple's philanthropic work, Jeremy understood with devastating clarity what he'd lost through his own arrogance. Not just a wife, not just children, not just wealth or status. He'd lost the chance to be part of something magnificent. The reception in the museum's East Wing was transformed into a space that reflected both elegance and the couple's commitment to healing. Guests received elegant programs that included information about the Foundation's latest projects, subtly inspiring future philanthropic partnerships. When Alok took the microphone to address her guests, her words resonated with the power of someone who transformed pain into purpose. 7 years ago, a very wise man taught me that love isn't about finding someone to complete you, but about finding someone who inspires you to become the best version of yourself. Before that lesson, I spent years diminishing myself to accommodate someone else's insecurities. The silence in the reception hall was complete, as Manhattan's elite recognized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A woman using her wedding reception to deliver a masterclass in self-worth and authentic partnership. Real love doesn't ask you to become smaller. It challenges you to become larger. It doesn't steal your dreams. It helps you build them. It doesn't break you down. It lifts you up. She turned to Dante with a smile that could have powered the museum for a week. Dante taught me that partnership means two whole people choosing to build something beautiful together. Our foundation has constructed 53 hospitals worldwide, but more importantly, our marriage has constructed a model of what's possible when love is based on respect rather than control. The applause was thunderous, but Alok held up her hand for silence as she prepared to deliver her final statement. To anyone who's ever been told they're too much, too ambitious, too successful, too independent, remember that the right person will celebrate those qualities, not try to diminish them. And if someone tries to break your spirit, use their destruction as fuel to build something magnificent. She paused, letting her words resonate through the reception hall. Because sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is reveal their true character early, before you've invested too much in the wrong person. As the evening continued with dancing and celebration, Jeremy remained seated in the prison common room, watching his ex-wife dance with her husband and sons, the family he'd abandoned before they'd even drawn breath, now complete without any need for his existence. Inside the reception hall, Aloke rejoined her husband and sons for the final dance of the evening, surrounded by friends and colleagues whose respect she'd earned through genius, perseverance, and the kind of strength that forged diamonds from pressure. "No regrets," Dante whispered as they swayed together to the evening's last song. "None," she replied with absolute certainty. "Some people break under pressure, others forge themselves into something unbreakable. Jeremy taught me which category I belonged to." "And which category is that?" Kai asked, having overheard as he and Zaire joined their parents for a family dance. "The category," Aloke said, gathering her sons close as her husband's arms surrounded them all, "of people who use their worst experiences to build their best lives." Later that night, in the privacy of their hotel suite, as Dante helped her out of her wedding gown and they prepared for their honeymoon in Morocco, where they would design their next hospital, Aloke reflected on the perfect completion of her story. Jeremy Paul Avance had returned to his prison cell, having witnessed exactly what he'd lost through his own choices. But his punishment wasn't her anger or vindictiveness. It was simply the natural consequence of treating love as disposable, while she chose to treat it as precious. "Do you think he learned anything?" Dante asked as they settled into bed together, official husband and wife after 7 years of building something beautiful together. "I think," Alok replied, curling against the man who'd proven that real love existed when you found someone worthy of it, "that some lessons can only be learned through loss. But that's his journey to take, not ours to worry about." Outside their window, New York City glittered with possibilities as endless as the love they'd built together. Inside their room, the Kingsley family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they'd created something Jeremy Paul Avance could never touch, steal, or destroy. Divine justice had been served not through revenge, but through the simple act of building a life so magnificent that his destruction had become irrelevant to their happiness. And that, Alok realized as sleep claimed her, was the most perfect ending of all.